Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of Unit 7. This is our very last chapter in your AMSCO books, and it's on urban challenges. The essential question for this chapter is what are the challenges facing cities around the world, and how are cities responding to those challenges? Once again, the enduring understandings for this entire unit are the form, function, and size of urban settlements are constantly changing. Models help to understand the distribution and size of cities. Models of internal city structure and urban development provide a framework for urban analysis. Built landscapes and social space reflect the attitudes and values of a population, and urban areas face economic, political, social, cultural, and environmental challenges. By the end of this section, you'll be able to explain the planning and design issues and political organization of urban areas. Sustainable design initiatives include walkable mixed-use commercial and residential areas and smart growth policies. So some important vocab words here are new urbanism, green belts, and slow growth cities. Functional and geographic fragmentation of governments presents challenges in addressing urban issues. So first up, we're going to talk about sustainability, green belts, and smart growth. Maintaining the sustainability or long-term viability of cities has become a discussion for city planners, developers, and citizens. New development concepts are shaping the debate about city landscapes around the world. So one way that people are doing this is through green belts and smart growth. To combat urban sprawl, policymakers and planners have tried to limit sprawl by restricting the activities of developers. In Europe, green belts, areas of undeveloped land around an urban area, have been created. So they've basically blocked off these areas surrounding cities and have said you can't build anything here. That's what a green belt is. A similar phenomenon in the US is known as smart growth, a set of policies to preserve farmland and other open, undeveloped spaces near a city. Under the principles of smart growth, cities are allowed to annex land only in areas specifically designed by law. New York, Rhode Island, Washington, Tennessee, and Oregon have all enacted smart growth policies. Next up, we're going to talk about new urbanism, urban infill, ex-urbanism, and other changes. A movement in urban planning emerged in the 1990s called New Urbanism. Its goals including reducing sprawl, increasing affordable housing, and creating vibrant, livable neighborhoods, largely walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. That is, unlike the clear separation between residential and commercial uses created by zoning in most cities, these neighborhoods would have a mix of homes and businesses. Homes would include a variety of sizes and price ranges in order to create a socially diverse community. New urbanism faced two large obstacles. First, the existing system of zoning. The system had created segregated areas by land use and thus contributed to suburban sprawl. Also, public opinion. Some people who were accustomed to traditional land use patterns in cities were not convinced that the new urbanism was important. However, in communities that change their zoning laws and where people change their attitudes towards mixed-use neighborhoods, new urbanism did take hold. Next up, urban infill. The opposite of leapfrog development and sprawl is urban infill, the process of building up underused lands within a city. Cities have areas of vacant or undeveloped land of varying sizes. These may be remnants of previous industrial activity, old airports, closed military bases, closed hospitals, zones with difficult terrain, or remnants of orchards or farms surrounded by later development. Infill is the process of building up these areas for urban use rather than expanding the edge of the city. The community of Civita, California is an example of both urban infill and new urbanism. This master planned community was built on the site of a former quarry, which is where rock and other stone was extracted, located in Mission Valley section of San Diego. Today, Civita includes a mix of housing types, parks, and community centers, and commercial zones. It's well connected by public transit. The community also promotes sustainability by using sustainable building materials, solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations, and energy management tools for residents and businesses. While cities are the destination for most of the world's migrants, the counterflow of urban residents leaving cities is known as counter-urbanization or de-urbanization. Many of these migrants are relocating to exurbs, the prosperous residential districts beyond the suburbs. Contributing to exurbanism is the ability of people to work remotely via technology. This removes their need to commute. Other factors include relative affordability and cultural preferences. While many people move into the city to be near cultural amenities, ex-urbanites are attracted to different features, such as mountains, streams, or other elements of the physical landscape. Some people prefer the calm of smaller, more isolated communities to the vibrancy of larger, more interconnected city life. Cities adapt to their growing and evolving populations. For example, the creation of pedestrian zones where street fairs, festivals, and public events can be held to help make inner cities both safer and more desirable destinations. The creation of bike lanes and an increase in bike usage reduces traffic congestion and parking needs while encouraging a healthy lifestyle. In addition, increasing the number of running paths, community gardens, and dog parks further promotes the health and well-being of residents. Many cities are actively developing relationships with local farmers, which benefit both urban and rural citizens through the spread of farmers markets and the promotion of a more sustainable local economy. In this next section, you're going to learn how to be able to evaluate problems and solutions associated with growth and decline within urban areas. Economic and social problems associated with the growth and decline of urban communities include housing and insurance discrimination, housing affordability, access to food stores and public services, disamenity zones, zones of abandonment, and gentrification. So first up, we're going to talk about inner cities, overcoming poverty, urban decay, and redevelopment. Cities are nodes, places characterized by numerous interconnections and complexity. This can make them leading centers for innovation, cultural diversity, and art. They are often engines of economic growth and centers of political power. But the dense concentration of people combined with the interconnectedness and complexity can make solving problems difficult. Cities can be places of poverty, violence, and environmental decay. The world is more urbanized than ever, and experts expect the percent of people living in cities to continue to grow. Consequently, understanding and helping solve urban challenges will continue to be an important part of the work of geographers. The root of many of the challenges faced by urban areas is economic. The role of cities in more developed countries has changed rapidly as they have shifted from centers of industry to centers of service. Conversely, in less developed countries, cities have experienced problems that accompany rapid industrialization and crushing new number of migrants. And with people with great wealth concentrate in cities, so do people with little wealth. Urban poverty exists throughout the world, from inner cities, the regions just outside the central business districts in North American cities, to densely settled peripheral suburbs in Europe, to the squatter settlements and favelas of less developed countries. According to the United Nations report, about 1/6 of the world's population live in urban poverty, and most of these are in developing countries. Some people refer to the higher concentration of poor residents as the underclass, people who face social hardships that contribute to their poverty. Where poverty is persistent, people sometimes develop a culture of poverty, a way of living that reflects a lack of income and accumulated wealth. The shortage of inexpensive housing may force a person to spend a high percentage of his or her income on rent or may result in homelessness. The distribution of political power may result in students in poor neighborhoods attending inadequately funded schools. Poor individuals often live far from places with concentrations of entry-level jobs. People have difficulty getting credit in any form, credit cards for everyday purchases, a mortgage to buy a house, or loans to start a business. These problems can be particularly difficult to address in less developed countries, where the general level of wealth is low. Industry once thrived in central cities in developed countries, yet newer technology has decreased the need for workers. undercutting the economic strength of many cities. In addition, manufacturing moved to the suburbs where land was cheaper and to other countries where labor was less expensive. As manufacturing moved away, cities were left with unemployed residents and abandoned factories. Brownfields are visual reminders of the landscape of how the centers of cities have changed over time. A typical brownfield consists of dilapidated buildings and polluted or contaminated soils. These are expensive to remove or repair and often remain in cities, devaluing neighborhood properties for many years. Housing has also suffered from decay in central cities. Filtering is the changing in the use of a house from a single-family home to rented units in a multi-family dwelling and eventually to an abandoned building. At the scale of a single house, a wealthy family may have moved to the suburbs to become absentee landlords of less wealthy residents. As the house grew older, it might have become further subdivided into apartments, as the building deteriorated and attracted poorer and poorer residents. At the neighborhood scale, filtering can be made worse by redlining, the process by which banks refuse loans to those who want to purchase and improve properties in certain urban areas. The banks might consider investment in some areas too risky. The term originated as banks sometimes identified these no-loan areas by red lines on maps. Redlining reinforces the downward spiral of struggling neighborhoods. Laws now restrict redlining so that it's not based on racial discrimination. African Americans and people of color were impacted the most by redlining. For more information, go ahead and click on this link right here that you can find on the PowerPoint. The process of urban redevelopment involves renovating a site within a city by removing the existing landscape and rebuilding from the ground up. The process of urban redevelopment usually begins when a local government declares that an area it wishes to develop is blighted. Eminent domain laws allow the government to seize land for public use after paying owners the market value for their property. Cities often use these laws to enable them to build new roads or schools, but they can also sell the land to private businesses or groups to build hotels, hospitals, or other developments. While redevelopment initiatives sometimes replace brownfields or low-quality housing with successful enterprises, critics point out these efforts can cause problems. They can force poor people to leave their homes and communities. Redevelopment can break up and eliminate historic neighborhoods. Private developers are also sometimes given tax break initiatives to purchase and build. By reducing tax revenues on these projects, the city shifts the tax burden to other taxpayers. Next up, we're going to talk about housing, government housing, and homelessness. Cities are diverse, heterogeneous places. Their ethnic and cultural diversity enriches the community through a variety of groups of people, restaurants, stores, architecture, and art. But this same diversity can promote division. Income range from the super rich to the middle class to the poor and homeless in cities. What is a problem for one group may not be a problem for another, and the solutions to any problem will have impacts on the other issues. Cities must cope with the intersecting problems of multiple groups. In developing countries, poor residents construct housing from whatever materials are available. Bricks and cement blocks are more durable, but sheets of tin and plastic are also used. Because of a lack of enforcement of housing codes, living in these buildings is dangerous. In 2013, 74 people died when an apartment building collapsed in Mumbai, India. Housing for poor residents in the inner cities in the developed world is characterized by at least three problems. It is of poor quality, insufficient availability, and significant unaffordability. Much of the housing is older and has not been maintained. The physical conditions of the buildings need updates to be safe and comfortable. Properly maintaining and repairing plumbing, electrical systems, roofing, stairwells, and heating systems are often unaffordable to inner city residents. Landlords often delay making expensive repairs. Therefore, over time, the overall quality of the housing suffers. This process is often visible in the transitional areas of cities as well as ethnic enclaves, since both have a high percentage of renters. As land values rise in inner cities along the growing edge of the central business district, urban residents are pushed out by rising rents. Gentrification, the process of wealthier residents moving into a neighborhood and making it unaffordable for existing residents, usually improves the housing quality. But as property values increase, older residents on fixed incomes and lower income residents can no longer afford to pay taxes on their homes or rents for their apartments. Unable to afford housing in the suburbs or in the central business district, residents often crowd into the housing that is available and affordable. Even finding housing in the inner city can be a challenge. Homes and buildings might be dilapidated and uninhabitable. Owners sometimes demolish buildings to make way for new structures. This interrupts the filtering process, which can create housing for poor residents. Investors might conclude they cannot make a profit building affordable housing, and so little is built. Infrastructure development, such as freeways, rail lines, transit hubs, all of which benefit suburban and wealthy central business district residents, compete for space in the inner city. Governments have responded to the shortage of low-income housing in various ways. The federal government provides financial subsidies to help low-income residents with the cost of housing. New York City, Denver, and some other cities have rent control policies that help some affordable units available when a neighborhood gentrifies. However, critics point out these policies reduce initiatives for investors to build new housing. One reason for the shortage of affordable housing in urban neighborhoods is the cost of building and managing it can be greater than the profits of a business can make from it. So governments and charitable groups in both the business can make from it. So governments and charitable groups in both the US and other countries often step in to provide assistance, either by building and operating housing or by providing subsidies for others to do so. These public housing developments, sometimes called projects, were first built in areas of the inner city where other structures had been torn down. Many provided decent housing and a solid sense of community. However, many cities built high-rise apartment buildings which concentrated poverty in a small area within the city. These buildings experienced problems common in other urban neighborhoods where the poor were concentrated, such as drugs, high crime rates, and poor maintenance. In some cities, another approach called scattered sites was employed to alleviate the problems of public housing. In this approach, public housing was dispersed throughout areas of the city. Children thus had access to better local schools and amenities available in wealthier neighborhoods. This scattered site approach faced opposition from the not in my backyard or NIMBY response. People fear that adding public housing near them will reduce property values and create problems for local schools. Next up, homelessness. The extreme end of housing problems is homelessness, the condition of not having a permanent place to live. While some homeless people find temporary shelter with friends or relatives, others live on the streets. In the United States, the homeless were once primarily single men, but the problem expanded in the late 20th century to include more women and children. Government, religious groups, and nonprofit organizations responded by building shelters, advocating for public funding to support housing, and helping the homeless learn new skills. In cities without strong public transit systems, homeless people have difficulty traveling to where jobs and services are available. Next up, we're going to talk about services, food deserts, gender, race, and ethnicity, and more on gentrification. Much like housing, shops and other services struggle to survive in some urban neighborhoods. If the patrons are poor, prices for services must be low to maintain a customer base. The result is very tight margins with little money available for shop owners to spend on maintenance or improvement of their facilities. The decay that affects housing thus spreads across the service sector. Public services such as parks and swimming pools might be rare in urban neighborhoods with low tax bases. Private businesses such as doctors and dentists are often scarce in poor neighborhoods. They are particularly scarce in poor, heavily urbanized countries. In Bangladesh, the number of doctors per capita is about 1/5 the number in the United States. Access to food stores in urban neighborhoods can be a particular problem. Fresh, healthy foods may be far less available than fast food. Grocery stores and supermarkets tend to favor suburban locations where residents are wealthier and parking lots can be expansive. Additionally, less harmful fast food options are less expensive than fresh food is, so poor families may have little choice beyond fast foods. These urban zones that lack food stores are known as food deserts, and they contribute to health problems for poor urban residents, including obesity. An urban food desert can be defined as an area where residents have limited or no access to healthy food because of inadequate transportation. One striking example of a food desert is in the neighborhood in Raleigh, North Carolina. Even though the neighborhood is an upscale area that includes a popular stretch of eateries known as Restaurant Row, one particular home for low income elderly people has no grocery store within walking distance. Women are more numerous than men in large central cities in North America. One reason for this disparity is the high number of households headed by females. These women and their children who live with them are more likely to be poorer than men. Hence, they concentrate in areas where housing is the least expensive, even if these areas often have higher crime rates. Problems for women and children may be compounded by the lack of good schools, parks and playgrounds, and available daycare options. Racial segregation in housing occurs when people live in separate neighborhoods based on their ethnicity or race. Segregation often occurs involuntarily. In particular, throughout U.S. history, many communities had neighborhoods where African Americans could live and neighborhoods where they could not. Such segregation was enforced through custom, violence, and real estate practices known as redlining. One of these practices was called blockbusting, in which people of one ethnic group, usually middle class whites, could be frightened into selling their homes at low prices when they heard that a family of another group, usually African American or Hispanic, was moving into the neighborhood. Investors would profit by buying up the houses at low prices and reselling them for more money. Real estate agents would profit from a flurry of transactions. Segregated neighborhoods can sometimes become ghettos, areas of poverty occupied by a minority group as a result of discrimination. Ghetto residents often feel trapped because of social or political factors or lack of economic opportunities. Segregated housing can also result when people voluntarily choose to live near people of their own race or ethnicity for social reasons. Immigrants have created ethnic enclaves, also known as urban colonies, where new residents can be close to religious institutions, stores that sell familiar goods, and friends and relatives who speak their language. Hence, cities across the US include neighborhoods with names such as Chinatown, Little Italy, and Greektown. More recently, ethnic enclaves have been composed of Serbian, Ethiopian, Filipino, Somali, and Hmong immigrants. Over time, as the immigrants acculturate, the enclave might disappear. Gentrification often occurs when old inner-city housing is purchased at low prices and renovated by investors or by new residents with higher incomes. Often these neighborhoods are near the central business district and its many theaters, restaurants, and museums and available public transportation. The newcomers are often a combination of two groups. One is young urban professionals, also known as yuppies, with high-paying jobs. The other is older couple whose children have moved out, empty nesters. While gentrification brings investment to communities, it often creates problems for existing residents. If investments drive up rents and property taxes, long-time but less wealthy residents can't afford to remain in the neighborhood. They often have to move. In the 1970s, Chicago's Wicker Park was a diverse working-class neighborhood of immigrants from Eastern Europe and Latin America. Developers began to renovate old housing and either resold the buildings at high prices or recruited artists and young people to fill them and give Wicker Park a trendy identity. As real estate values skyrocketed, many of the older residents had to leave. Eventually, many of the artists had to relocate as well to other less expensive neighborhoods. By the early 2000s, gentrification had transformed Wicker Park from an ethnic neighborhood into one of the most expensive areas. Walled or fenced neighborhoods with limited access and entry points are called gated communities. They represent a redesign of urban living with an attempt to recapture features more commonly found outside urban areas: safety, quiet, and homogeny. Gated communities are growing in cities all around the world. Some have referred to them as citadels, after historic castles and forts built to ensure safety inside the walls amid lawlessness and crime outside. The growth of gated communities can reinforce separation in terms of not just economies, but also social class, ethnicity, and even political views. After our final section, you'll be able to evaluate problems associated with urban sustainability. Land use and environmental problems associated with the growth and decline of urban communities include suburban sprawl, sanitation, air and water quality, remediation and redevelopment of brownfields, farmland protection, and energy use. So we're going to cover environmental effects of cities and wildlife, pollution, and urban sprawl. Cities have environmental impacts in at least two important ways. The actual city structure itself, the buildings and streets, are human modifications of the natural environment, and the concentration of so many people in one location can dramatically affect the landscape. Simply by living, a person places stress on nature, and in cities that stress is greatly magnified. The physical landscape of an urban area affects the natural environment in many ways. Urban canyons, streets lined with tall buildings, can channel and intensify wind. These tall buildings also prevent natural sunlight from reaching the ground. Soils are compacted and replaced with surfaces impermeable to water, such as buildings, streets, and parking lots. As a result, rainwater runs off instead of soaking into the ground, which can cause flooding. The concentration of buildings in the core of a city creates an urban heat island, a portion of a city warmer than surrounding areas. And guys, this summer, I want you, if you drive into Atlanta, I want you to check what the temperature is when you leave your house, and then what the temperature is when you actually get to the city. Because you'll notice that almost always the temperature is going to increase by at least a few degrees between the suburbs and the city. So wildlife is also affected by urban areas. Cities destroy animal and plant habitats, redirect or replace natural hydraulic systems such as rivers and lakes, and break up ecosystems. The interruption of continuous ecosystems makes it difficult, if not impossible, for animal species to survive. When animals do survive, they often are in conflict with humans. Native animals such as deer, coyotes, skunks, alligators, bears, cougars, monkeys, and leopards cause problems where cities have invaded or abused their natural territories. Urban wildlife such as rats, raccoons, and pigeons can thrive in cities, but they can spread diseases and be a nuisance to people. Feral populations of cats, dogs, snakes, and other former pets that have escaped their human owners or have been abandoned can be dangerous or upset the ecological balance. Increased environmental degradation is associated with rising urbanism. Industrial and human waste, concentrated in cities and sometimes untreated, pollutes rivers, coasts, and aquifers. The rise of industry pollutes the air in cities in less developed countries, and rising wealth increases the number of cars and their emissions. Poorer inhabitants in these cities burn charcoal, wood, and kerosene, all of which pollute the air. The health of city dwellers is negatively affected by all of these contaminants in both the water and the air. In developed countries, automobile pollution problems can be severe. The huge number of commuters to central business districts and surrounding edge cities creates problems beyond congestion. During rush hour, the commuting periods in early morning and late afternoon or early evening, when many people travel to and from work, idling cars on roads increase and concentrate air pollutants in the city. The result is smog, a plague in large cities such as Los Angeles, Beijing, Delhi, and Mexico City. Many cities have physical geography factors such as mountains or climatic conditions that intensify or trap pollution. For example, Mexico City is surrounded by mountains, and during temperature inversions, smog can be trapped and concentrated close to the ground for days with negative health effects on the city's inhabitants. According to the World Health Organization, air pollution results in 3 million deaths per year. One-third of those are in China, where coal is widely used both for industry and to heat homes. Before automobiles became popular, cities tended to grow vertically through taller buildings as population expanded. Since the mid 20th century, cities and everything that go with them, such as roads and commercial developments, have expanded horizontally across the landscape. This rapid spread of development outward from the inner city is called urban sprawl. In the United States, sprawl is most common in fast-growing areas in the southeast and west. Again, that's the Sun Belt. Urban areas experience sprawl for several reasons: the availability of automobiles, the creation of interstate and other high-speed highways, and the presence of inexpensive land outside the urban area all contribute to urban sprawl. Developers purchase land beyond the periphery of the city's built-up area in a process called leapfrogging. Neighborhoods built there may be further from the central business district in actual distance, but the presence of highways makes them relatively close in terms of time. All right, guys, that concludes it for Unit 7, which is our final unit. We have covered everything that is going to be on the AP exam. And when we get back from spring break, we are going to start our review for the AP exam. So you'll have several review PowerPoints from me, as well as some review quizzes to help us prepare for May 4th, which is the AP exam.